After completing Dark Souls, the logical thing to do next was tackle Dark Souls 2, you know, since 2 comes after 1. Dark Souls 2, specifically the Scholar of the First Sin edition, which is what I played, is often considered as the black sheep of the Soulsborne games. It's also the only game not directed by Miyazaki. The general consensus is that it's a good game, but a bad Souls game. My first reaction to that was,
what the f does that mean, Kobe Bryant?
it makes me wonder if the game is actually trash or if Souls players are just whiny little bitches. That being said, I loaded up the game and was prepared to die. Twice. Funny enough, you actually get an achievement for dying for the first time in this game. Just wanted to put that out there. Anywho, you start off by being told that you will do things without knowing why you do them. I'm not even joking, that's actually the opening cutscene for the game.
But one day, you will stand before its decrepit gate without really knowing why.
Honestly, that perfectly sums up all of the Souls games for those who don't have hours to spend watching VOD video. And don't expect me to summarize the story here, because on top of having a bad track record for summarizing stories, I genuinely had no idea what was going on while playing this game. I know that they start off by throwing you into the middle of nowhere, then you make it to the house where the ladies roast you for being ugly, arguably the most realistic thing about the game, and at this point you can customize your character. I've done Reverse Kratos and Emo Gerard Butler in the past. For a game like this, my character needed to be strong. He needed to be versatile, and above all else, he needed to be the cultural icon that would save Drang Lake from whatever was going on over there. Again, I didn't really follow the story. He needed to be the Ford F-150.
Well, when we get to sipping whiskey and we get a little frisky, I climb up on him, ride him like an F-150. Got me hooting and hollering and begging him for more. Nothing but my boots on, baby, let's get down on the floor.
Yeah, I genuinely sat there trying to make my character look like a pickup truck, and I think I did a decent job all things considered. Anywho, the Ford F-150 raced his way to Majula, the undisputed best hub in any Souls game. As soon as you enter the place, that theme hits you and you feel like you're home. This is arguably the best part of the game, and while Dark Souls 1 map feels like a circle where everything comes back to Firelink, Majula in Dark Souls 2 is more like a tree trunk with every level branching out from it. I personally like this more than Dark Souls 1 because it gives players more of a choice for where they can go first, but more often than not, players head towards the Forest of the Fallen Giants, similar to how in Dark Souls 1, most players headed to the Undead Burg. When making your way to the Forest of the Fallen Giants, you can encounter one of the main problems people have with Dark Souls 2, the enemy placement. I'm not sure why or how they managed to come up with this, but the bulk of the game's difficulty comes from the fact that many levels in the game have hordes of enemies that would make the average COD Zombies player foam at the mouth. The only problem is that in this game, you don't have a ray gun. There's countless memes about this, my favorite being this one. The point being that you gotta deal with a ton of enemies before making it to what could potentially be a boss fight. It's frustrating, and I personally don't know why they did this. I surely hope it wasn't their attempt to increase the difficulty, because I don't think that needing to have more patience makes the game more difficult. The enemy placement in Dark Souls 2, specifically Scholar, has been such a large complaint, but I genuinely don't understand why. Are players just that impatient? The enemy AI in this game is also really stupid. You can just lure out enemies one by one to kill them. It's why getting souls in the game is so easy, and I was often overleveled for certain areas because of it. The stupid AI paired with often being overleveled made the majority of the game very easy. Another thing I want to mention is a new feature they added called Soul Memory. It's essentially a counter that keeps track of how many souls you've obtained on that character throughout their lifetime. Not to be confused with your souls counter on the bottom right, that's how many you currently have. To my knowledge, this has one good use in the main story, but it's primarily used to determine who you encounter in PvP. Short note, I heard the PvP is actually great in this game, but I don't play PvP. Now I'm going to briefly run through the main story of the game. There will be spoilers, and if you don't want to be spoiled, skip to this part of the video. You have been warned. Similar to the first game, you have to kill 4 Lord Soul bosses. However, unlike the first game, you do it in the first half of the story rather than the second half. The 4 Lord Soul bosses in this game are Duke's Dear Freya, the Old Iron King, the Rotten, and the Lost Sinner, all of which are very easy. After killing each Lord Soul boss, you light up the primal bonfires, which just take you back to Majula, and then when you kill all 4 Lord Soul bosses and light the 4th primal bonfire, you'll meet Aldia, who doesn't tell you his name until much later. Once you take care of the 4 Lord Soul bosses, you can open up the Shrine of Winter and make your way to Drangleic Castle. Alternatively, you could just bypass killing the 4 Lord Soul bosses by getting a million soul memory, which also allows you to open up the Shrine of Winter. Keep in mind that with every New Game Plus cycle, it'll add an additional million soul memory to the amount you'll need to bypass the Shrine of Winter early. Once you get to Drangleic Castle, you'll meet the scammer Nashandra, beat the Looking Glass Knight, travel through the game's version of Hell, beat the Demon of Song, go through the Undead Crypt to beat Velstadt, and feel bad for Vendrick before stealing his ring. The King's Ring allows you to open certain doors throughout the map, including the one that leads you to the Throne of Want. However, you shouldn't head there just yet because you can't beat the game without heading to Aldia's Keep. Why do we need to go there? To get to the Dragon Shrine. Why do we need to go there? To get the Ashen Mist Heart. And what's that for? To enter the giant memories throughout the Forest of the Fallen Giants. To beat the game, we only need to go through the memory where you fight the Giant Lord to get the Giant's kinship, but going through the other ones allows us to get Giant Souls, which we can then use to do more damage to Vendrick if you choose to kill him. Additionally, you can enter Vendrick's memory to learn more about him and how he got scammed by Nashandra. So with everything set, we can head to the Throne of Want to take on the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender, followed by Nashandra. And if you spoke to him in all 3 locations as well as killed Vendrick, you can also take on Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. Just because his name's the title of the game doesn't mean I can't beat his ass. Once you do that, you can either ascend to the throne or walk away if you did the Aldia quest. In this game, there's only 1 achievement you get for triggering either ending, so you could pick whichever one. But that's basically the story. Honestly, it's not that long and not the main reason why people play this game. That would be for the gameplay. Now, I've already mentioned the bad enemy placement and the soul memory, but believe it or not, Dark Souls 2 introduced a lot of features that are seen in newer Soulsborne games. Those features include, but are not limited to, power stancing, stat respec, omnidirectional rolling, and not starting New Game Plus as soon as you beat the main story. Something I want to touch on, which I've only noticed in this game, would be some of the attack animations. Yui Tanimura, the game's creative director, went out of his way to hire historians and professionals, as well as invest in new mocap technology to give players a more immersive combat experience. This can be seen when power stancing certain weapons or doing backstabs and riposte attacks. Very cool. Another cool feature exclusive to Dark Souls 2 would have to be the interactive boss arenas. I'm only going to show the Pursuer fight in my footage since this is an early game boss, so I don't really have to worry about spoilers. With this boss in particular, you could fight him like normal, or you could head to the back of the arena and shoot him with the ballistas to insta-kill him. There's another boss relatively early into the game where flipping a switch before entering the boss arena will make the arena bigger. Although many people tend not to do this because they often use the gaps to make the boss fall off the map. The third and final example I'll give of a cool interactive boss arena would be for a boss later into the game. This boss room is covered in poison, which can make the relatively easy boss fight a bit of a challenge. However, if you use your torch and burn the windmill close to where the boss room is, the poison pool will disappear, which makes that boss fight a breeze. A nice reward for a bit of exploration. Those are just 3 of many interactive boss rooms in the game, and I like them because they add more character to the boss fight itself, making them a little more than just things you gotta kill to progress the game. Another feature I really liked were the bonfire aesthetics, which you can burn at bonfires to increase the New Game Plus cycle for that particular area. It essentially resets the area and even allows you to refight bosses, albeit they'll be harder. If you're a Destiny player like myself, then you'll be glad to know that bonfire aesthetics allow you to farm bosses for souls. The 2 most popular being the Rotten because it's a very easy boss and it's a Lord Soul boss, which means you'll get more souls from it, and Giant Lord because when you burn an ascetic in that area, you can get it back, effectively giving you infinite bonfire aesthetics. The weapon upgrade system in this game is also phenomenal because it's very straightforward. Most weapons you upgrade with Titanite shards, chunks, and slabs. Some you upgrade with Twinkling Titanite, and boss weapons are upgraded with Petrified Dragon Bones. Not to mention that boss weapons are much easier to obtain now compared to Dark Souls 1, where all you need to do is trade the boss soul for the weapon rather than have to upgrade a different weapon with the boss soul to get the boss weapon. But the best part is that every single weapon in the game can be infused, and it's very easy to do so. All you need to do is grab the Dull Ember and give it to Macduff, which you pick up on the way to Macduff, and you can infuse whatever you want as long as you have the stone for the infusion you want to do. It really makes things convenient for players, and it's not just weapon upgrades that are convenient in Dark Souls 2. You remember how in Dark Souls 1 you weren't allowed to travel between bonfires until the midway point of the game where you get the Lord Vessel? And even after you got the Lord Vessel, there were only certain bonfires you could travel to? Yeah, in Dark Souls 2, right from the beginning, you could fast travel to any bonfire you want. This is infinitely better than Dark Souls 1. Another thing that's much better than Dark Souls 1 is the UI, because there's no more doom scrolling screens, and the equipment menu also allows you to see your character while the menu's open, making Fashion Souls a lot easier. Additionally, the stat screen was very clean and had even more useful information such as casting speed and agility. Now here's where I talk about one of the most infamous things in Dark Souls 2, agility and the adaptability stat. Adaptability is a stat which can be leveled, and it affects your agility as well as a lot of damage resistances. Your agility is what determines how many invincibility frames, or iframes, you get when you dodge. Now the problem is, you're essentially forced to level up this stat a little bit because no matter what class you pick, the default adaptability stat is low enough so that your dodge rolls have the same amount of iframes as fat rolling in Dark Souls 1. It's absolutely absurd, but thankfully you only need to level it up until your agility stat reaches either 96, which will give you the same amount of iframes as Dark Souls 1's medium roll, or 105, which gives the same amount of iframes as Dark Souls 1's light roll. It's kinda scummy, but shit, it is what it is. Anything past those numbers I mentioned before is a little overkill, and it makes the game easier than it already is. And I'm not even joking. This game is genuinely easy. I can't think of a single boss where I struggled. If anything, the hardest part of the game is just getting to the bosses because some of these runbacks are horrendous, especially in the DLC. Not to mention that when you die in this game, your maximum HP is reduced by 5% each time, all the way down to 50%. This is the game's hollowing effect, and there's an explanation in the story that no one really paid attention to, but still, that HP reduction when you die every time is annoying. To reverse this hollowing and restore your HP to its maximum value, you need to consume a human effigy, similar to how you had to consume a humanity at a bonfire in Dark Souls 1 to reverse your hollowing. Except this time, you can consume effigies anywhere. It's just another one of the multiple features FromSoft added to this game in an attempt to improve on the first one, which is all the game really is in my opinion. Dark Souls 2 just feels like a testing ground for a whole bunch of new features, with some of them being good enough and balanced enough to make it into other games. Albeit, not every single great feature from Dark Souls 2 was brought over. For example, the torch mechanics. I have no idea why this wasn't brought back. Basically, you were able to light up a torch at any bonfire or open flame, which is very realistic, but I guess they didn't want to bring it back in future games, I don't know. I also don't know why they didn't bring back hexes in any kind of way, especially given how great they were in this game. Not that I use them, but hexes and dark damage as a whole were incredibly strong, and I even made a build focused around the dark infused Crypt Blacksword, which eviscerated enemies with the amount of damage it was doing. Now, although the newer games don't have things like bonfire aesthetics, realistic torch mechanics, interactive boss arenas, and cool attack animations, there's also some features that are better kept in the past. I already went over adaptability, but another thing I'm glad that was left back in this game would have to be the fragrant branches of yore. Basically, there were certain parts of the game that were blocked off by a petrified statue, and you needed fragrant branches of yore to unpetrify the statue and clear the way. It kind of felt like a cheap way to block progression for certain parts of the game. I'd much rather you being able to get to a harder area much earlier than intended, and then getting mollywopped by the enemies there, than having some random obstacle block your way unless you obtain the right item to move it. Kind of like how in Elden Ring, you have the option to go straight to Caelid or even Lane Dell if you wanted to, and were willing to deal with getting ass fucked by the enemies over there. It's not that Fragrant Branch's Vior are hard to come by, just tedious more than anything. It reminds me of something like in Pokemon when the Snorlax would block your way until you got the Pokeflute to move it. Little tedious things aside, I think the gameplay for this game is overall criminally underrated. You got all of the features from Souls games that people know and love, along with plenty of features added into this game that often get overlooked because people are too busy complaining about the poor enemy placement, which is bad, but not as bad as people make it out to be. Overall, I really liked Dark Souls 2. It's definitely not my favorite of the Soulsborne games because I started with the best one, but I do think it's a step up from Dark Souls 1 in terms of combat and quality of life changes. Although I didn't talk about them much to avoid spoilers, the boss fights were good, but not as memorable as the Dark Souls 1 bosses in my opinion. I also think that the levels are more polished in a sense that they each have their own unique challenge to them. There's a poison area, a don't fall into the lava area, a why is this in this game area, and much more. And I haven't even gone into the details about the DLC. If you have the Scholar Edition, you automatically get the DLC, but since it's not a part of the base game, I decided not to include it much in this video. What I will say about the DLC is that I love the new areas for each DLC. They're very different from the already diverse areas which we have in the base game, and I love the aesthetics of all of them. The first DLC takes place in an underground city, the second DLC takes place in an industrial area, and the third DLC takes place on the set of Disney's Frozen. Each DLC has some cool bosses that are a step up from the base game in terms of difficulty and overall boss design. Again, I'm not going to mention any of them because of spoilers, but I will say that the final bosses of each DLC were really cool and challenging to a certain degree, which of course made beating them even more satisfying. What wasn't satisfying about these DLCs were some of the runbacks for these bosses. Not gonna go through all of them, but I'll mention the worst one. This shit. Wasn't I just here? I'd be dead here. What is this area? What is this area? I don't want to be here. 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 Why? Anywho, Dark Souls 2 is good, the DLC is good besides some terrible boss runbacks, and getting all of the achievements for this game isn't too bad. You do need to do a bit of farming as well as get to New Game Plus 2 to get all of the mastery achievements, but it's not the worst thing you have to do for an achievement. If you haven't played the game already, you really should. Don't let the general opinion of this game deter you from playing it. I genuinely had a lot of fun and I bet you will too. But that's gonna conclude this video. Next up is Dark Souls 3, which I am very excited to play. That game supposedly has some of the best bosses in any Soulsborne game, and I look forward to beating all of them. Not sure if I'll do a traditional series on that game like I did with Dark Souls 2, but I'll definitely put out some Dark Souls 3 content, so keep an eye out. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.